I like speaking after Georgia because I know always that you're all going to be awake still at the end of it. I'm going to stand here. I've heard that these things that he's wearing are called goosenecks, and I don't want to be called a gooseneck. Now, first of all, I want to thank the university and Dima for giving me the opportunity to be here, and congratulate you on having what I think is your first CSR conference. Excellent news. And I want really, in the 10 minutes that I've got, to cover 3 themes. I'm supposed to be, I see, an international CSR advocate. Well, I was an international CSR advocate about 12 years ago, and I think I have been ever since, but I think I'm probably about to do myself out of a job, which may become clear in just a moment. But I'm going to cover 3 areas. I was asked to talk about about key developments, international developments in the area of CSR, and I've chosen 2 because there are so many. There's not time to talk about them all. And then I'm going to say a little bit about developments in the MENA region and the implications of those for all of you. Although I'm not going to go into too much depth about that because you know more about the developments in the region than I do. Now, of the 2 developments, international developments I've selected, one is about doing good. And we heard a lot about doing good this morning. And the other one is about avoiding harm. We didn't hear very much about that in the first session this morning. Now, on doing good, and both of these, the boundary between the 2 is not rigid, so I will stray from one to the other. But generally, on doing good, I think the most interesting development internationally is actually the change in the language. And to an extent, I had the impression this morning that that language is changing here in the region as well. I want to ask you a question. This was marketed, this conference, as a conference for CSR practitioners. I don't actually know what CSR practitioners means, but I would be interested to know how many of you have CSR in your job title? Oh, more than I thought. I don't think it actually matters very much, because each organization is going to organize itself in a different way. But I think that the question that those of you have to ask who have CSR in your job title is, what does this mean about my position within the company? Am I at the heart of the culture of this company, or am I an add-on? Am I there to do something that nobody else does? Or is responsible business really integrated into the culture of the company? And you heard a bit about that in the session this morning, quite a lot about it. And I was particularly interested that Hussein from Aramex, in his presentation, mentioned CSR once. And he mentioned it when he was talking about this conference, not when he was talking about Aramex. What did he talk about? He talked about sustainability. And we hear all sorts of other terms which are currently being used instead of CSR. We hear about stakeholder stewardship. You heard that one this morning? We hear about growth, inclusive growth, responsible growth. We hear about, when you heard Deloitte speak this morning, and they talked about the younger generation and what the buzzwords were for them in terms of the purpose of a company, you didn't see responsibility in that list. It was on the old people's list, but it wasn't on the young people's list. What did you hear? You had values, sustainability, innovation, societal development. And the point that I want to make to you, and why I might be doing myself out of a job, is that we're actually getting to a stage in the international sphere where CSR might well disappear as a term. Because CSR is a very useful concept at the beginning in persuading people of the need for businesses to be socially responsible. But once you get beyond that, it's really not very helpful, because then you get to the stage about what do we do? How do we integrate this into our corporate culture? And that's why increasingly you hear people talking about issues which are really core to their business. So there is no doubt when they're talking, when Aramex, when Hussein was talking this morning, you knew that what he was saying was core to the way that they did business. It had permeated their business culture. The other way in which language is changing is that people are talking about specifics, specific issues. So people talk about business and creating jobs, business and fighting poverty, business and preserving the environment, business and fighting climate change. Some of the things we didn't hear this morning, business and corruption. Business and human rights. I didn't hear human rights mentioned once this morning. I didn't hear corruption mentioned once this morning. And that gets back to my point at the beginning, that we're not here just talking about businesses doing good. We're talking also about businesses not causing harm. And maybe we'll hear a little bit more. I hope we'll hear a bit more about that as time goes on. And moving to my second theme, therefore, I want to talk a little bit about human rights, because that is another major development in the international sphere. How many of you have heard of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights? Slightly fewer than those who have CSR in their job titles, I think. But this is becoming a core issue in the international CSR, if we're going to use that term, debate. And it all results out of a process which took 6 years for the United Nations to agree on a set of guiding principles. And perhaps it's not surprising that human rights has really come to the core of these issues. Because when you think about it, the way in which business does its business, and if it is to do it in a responsible way, this is all about the impact it has on people. And so what this is seeking to do is to ensure that businesses look at their responsibilities through this lens. And what that means is businesses understanding the impact and the potential impact that they may have on the human rights of the people for whom they are in one way or another responsible, whether it is employees, customers, communities. Yeah? Now, there's a whole series of tools which have been developed and are still being developed in order to address this. But that's a question which those of you who are responsible to developing CSR within your businesses may want to think about. Have you really considered, has your business considered, does it have policies and processes in place to consider the impact that you have on human rights? That's my second point. And my third one, because I'm keeping an eye on the time, is the region. And I can do no better, really, and I hope you don't mind, Dima, than quote from Dima's welcome note, because she says it better than I ever could. There's a paragraph in there which I'm going to read out. She says, the dynamics of change across the region imply that traditional forms of Islamic philanthropy are starting to cross-fertilize with new, more institutionalized forms of giving advocated through Western concepts and advances pertaining to CSR. I won't read the whole thing because it's in your folder, but at the end she says, CSR practice that preserves the original social values but mobilizes resources more effectively in facilitating social change and addressing regional social ills pertaining to, and then she has a list, unemployment, poverty alleviation, healthcare, education, and women empowerment, among others. Now, the reason I raise that, and I mention that, is all these things are things which governments are supposed to have a major role in delivering. We've heard in some of the comments made this morning that governments have not always been as successful as they might have been in the region in delivering results in these areas. So the question which I really got for you is, to what extent are the political changes which we see taking place in this region likely to change that? And to what extent will they give you and your businesses the opportunity to have a greater impact in delivering some of these goals through partnership with government? Now, in the past in the region, when we've talked about businesses having relationships with governments, it hasn't always been talked about in the most healthy of ways. Do the new developments open up new opportunities? Because as several people have mentioned, you will only be likely to deliver sustainable results in these areas if everybody is pulling in the same direction. And that means working together, and that means finding ways of working together in order to deliver outcomes in these various areas. And some time ago, when I talked to somebody in a Gulf state, a few years ago now, about what they most needed for governments to do to help them deliver their goals, they said, stay out of the way. Now, I suspect that there may well still be some people in the room today who still think that. But I would suggest to you that that is not a sustainable way forwards. And so the question is really for you. It's not for me to answer. I'm not from this region. The question is, what are the opportunities? Has your business started to think about the opportunities for a new relationship with government? And I'll finish, I think my time is just about up. I will finish just by adding one new challenge, which really comes to mind after listening to the Minister this morning about the creation of a task force. Because one of the most difficult things in working with governments is coordination across government. You know, ministries often work in silos. They compete with one another. So one of the great challenges in working with government is how do you ensure that the government as a whole is committed to the sorts of outcomes which we're talking about. I'll stop there. Thank you.